Sarah thought her 20-year marriage was unbreakable until dinner last Tuesday. Her husband, David, looked her in the eye and asked for an open marriage like he was asking for more salt. He expected her to cry, scream, or pack a bag. Instead, Sarah just kept eating her steak, wiped her mouth, and said nothing. She didn't say yes and she didn't say no. What she did over the next 30 days didn't just break David. It dismantled his entire world. You think you know how a woman reacts to betrayal, but you have never seen a silence this loud. Subscribe now and watch until the very end, because the final 10 minutes will change how you look at your own relationship forever. David sat across from Sarah in their perfect suburban kitchen. He had practiced his speech for weeks. He told her he loved her, but that he felt stifled and wanted to explore other people while staying married. He watched her closely, waiting for the explosion. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't drop her fork. She looked at him with a face that was completely blank, like a mirror reflecting a stranger. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a fight. The silence lasted for 10 minutes. David started to sweat. He tried to explain the rules he had come up with, but Sarah just stood up and started clearing the table. She washed the dishes with steady hands. She didn't look at him once. David felt a surge of power, thinking he had won. He thought her silence was permission. He didn't realize that Sarah wasn't accepting his deal. She was starting a countdown. That night, Sarah slept on her side of the bed as if nothing had happened. David lay awake, confused. He checked his phone and messaged a woman named Monica, a younger coworker he had been flirting with. He told Monica that Sarah was on board. He felt like a king who had finally gotten his way. In the darkness, Sarah's eyes were wide open. She wasn't crying. She was mentally listing every asset they owned. The next morning, Sarah made breakfast like usual. 2 eggs, dry toast, and black coffee for David. She didn't speak a word. David tried to make small talk, but she just pointed at the clock to remind him he was late for work. He kissed her cheek, but she didn't lean in or pull away. She felt like a statue. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, Sarah went to the basement and opened an old metal filing cabinet. Sarah spent the morning calling a man named Arthur. Arthur was a retired private investigator who owed Sarah's father a favor. She told him she needed a shadow on David, but she didn't want photos of him with other women. She wanted something else. She wanted to know where David was hiding the money he had been siphoning from their joint savings for the last 2 years. She knew about the open marriage long before he asked. At work, David felt a new sense of freedom. He took Monica out for a long lunch. He told her his wife was modern and understanding. He felt proud of himself for being so honest. He didn't notice the gray sedan parked across the street. He didn't see the man inside taking notes on every store they entered. David felt like he was starting a second life, but he was actually walking into a trap Sarah had been building for months. When David came home that evening, the house was dark. There was a single note on the kitchen island. It wasn't a goodbye note. It was a grocery list. Sarah was at her bridge club meeting. David felt a strange pang of jealousy. He wondered if she was already meeting someone else. He realized that an open marriage meant she could play the game too. He looked at the quiet house and felt a sudden, cold fear that he had made a terrible mistake. For the second week, Sarah remained a ghost. She did the laundry, she kept the house clean, and she stayed beautiful. But she stopped being a wife.
She stopped asking about his day.
She stopped reminding him to take his blood pressure medicine. David found himself following her from room to room, trying to get a reaction. He told her about his dates, hoping she would get angry. Sarah just nodded and walked past him to water her plants. David's ego began to crumble. He went out with Monica 3 nights in a row, but he couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah was doing at home. He called her, but she didn't answer. When he checked the home security cameras, he saw her sitting on the back porch, reading a book and sipping tea. She looked more peaceful than she had in years. David started to realize that by asking for an open marriage, he had given her a vacation from him. Arthur, the investigator, called Sarah with a breakthrough. David wasn't just hiding money. He was invested in a shell company with his brother-in-law. They were planning to move the family's retirement fund into an offshore account by the end of the month. Sarah listened calmly. She told Arthur to wait. She wasn't ready to strike yet. She needed David to feel completely safe. She needed him to move every cent so she could catch him in the act. David started to get sloppy. He brought Monica to a bar near their house. He was shocked when he saw Sarah there, sitting at a table with a man David didn't recognize. The man was handsome, older, and dressed in a suit that cost more than David's car. They were laughing. Sarah looked younger than she had in a decade. David wanted to storm over and demand to know who the man was, but he remembered his own rules. He had no right to ask. The man with Sarah was actually a high-end real estate lawyer. Sarah was interviewing him to see if he was tough enough for what was coming. She saw David watching her from across the bar. She didn't look away. She didn't hide. She raised her glass to him in a silent toast. David's face went pale. He realized that Sarah wasn't just following his lead. She was outperforming him. He felt small, and for the first time, he felt old. That night, David tried to initiate intimacy with Sarah. He wanted to reclaim his territory. Sarah looked at him with pity. She told him she was tired and that he should probably go sleep in the guest room so he wouldn't wake her up when he got his late-night messages. Her voice was kind, almost motherly. It was the most insulting thing she could have said. David went to the guest room and cried, though he didn't know why. The next day, David's brother-in-law, Jim, called him in a panic. Someone had sent an anonymous tip to the bank about their offshore transfers. The accounts were temporarily frozen for an audit. David told Jim to stay calm, but his heart was racing. He looked at Sarah, who was calmly vacuuming the rug. He wondered if she knew. He dismissed the thought. She was just a housewife. She didn't know anything about wire transfers or shell companies. Or so he thought. The tension in the house became unbearable for David. He wanted to cancel the open marriage idea. He wanted to go back to the way things were. He sat Sarah down and told her he was wrong. He told her he only wanted her. Sarah looked at him and smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a warm smile. She told him that she actually liked the new arrangement. She told him it opened her eyes to how much she had been missing. David became obsessed with finding out who the man at the bar was. He started going through Sarah's phone at night, but it was locked with a new passcode. He followed her one afternoon and saw her entering a luxury apartment building downtown. He waited outside for 3 hours. When she came out, she was carrying a set of keys. David realized she had rented her own place. His open marriage had turned into her exit strategy. Sarah wasn't renting an apartment. She was preparing a safe house for her sister and her sister's kids. Her sister was leaving an abusive situation, and Sarah was using David's distraction with Monica to handle the logistics. She was also moving her personal heirlooms out of the house one by one. David was so focused on his own guilt and jealousy that he didn't notice the house was slowly becoming empty of everything that belonged to her. Monica started demanding more of David's time. She wanted him to leave Sarah. David realized he didn't love Monica. She was loud, demanding, and didn't know how he liked his coffee. He missed the quiet strength of his wife. He tried to break up with Monica, but she threatened to go to his boss and tell him about their office affair. David was trapped between a woman who didn't want him and a woman who wouldn't let him go. Sarah's investigator found the final piece of the puzzle. David's brother-in-law had been skimming from David too. The shell company was a disaster. If the bank audit went through, David wouldn't just be broke, he would be legally liable for Jim's mistakes. Sarah had all the documents. She could save him, or she could let him sink. She sat in her new apartment and looked at the files. She thought about 20 years of being a good wife. David came home to find a suitcase in the hallway. He thought Sarah was leaving.
He started to beg.
He fell to his knees and told her he was a fool. Sarah looked down at him. She told him the suitcase wasn't hers. It was his. She told him she knew about Monica, she knew about Jim, and she knew about the offshore accounts. She spoke in a calm, flat voice that was more terrifying than any scream. David realized she had been watching him fail the whole time. Sarah told him the bank audit was happening the next morning at 9 a.m. She told him she had already spoken to the bank manager. She offered David a choice. He could sign over the house and his remaining stocks to her, and she would provide the documents that proved Jim was the primary fraudster. Or he could keep his assets and face the legal consequences alone. David looked at his wife and realized she wasn't his partner anymore. She was his judge. David signed the papers. He had no choice. He watched as Sarah took the deed to the house and the titles to the cars. She didn't gloat. She just put them in her purse. She told him he had 24 hours to move his things out. David asked where he was supposed to go. Sarah told him that he had an open marriage, so he should probably go stay with one of his new partners. She walked into their bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, the bank audit was a bloodbath. Jim was arrested at his office. David was spared, but his reputation in the town was destroyed. Everyone knew he had tried to hide money. Monica was fired for her involvement in the office drama. David sat in a cheap motel room, looking at the four walls. He had his freedom, just like he asked for. But he had nothing else. He realized the open marriage was just the shovel he used to dig his own grave. Sarah spent the day at the spa. She felt light. For 20 years, she had carried the weight of David's ego and his family's secrets. Now, she was the owner of a $3 million estate and a healthy investment portfolio. She went to see her sister and the kids at the new apartment. They were safe. Sarah realized she wasn't just a wife or a victim. She was a woman who knew how to wait for the right moment to move. David tried to call Sarah's parents to get them on his side. He was shocked to find out they already knew everything. Sarah had been sending them updates for weeks. Her father told David never to call their house again. David realized that while he was playing a game of checkers with Monica, Sarah was playing grandmaster chess with the entire world. He was completely alone. Even his own family wouldn't speak to him. Weeks passed. Sarah put the house on the market. She didn't want the memories. She saw David sitting in his car at the end of the driveway one evening. He looked thin and tired. He didn't come to the door. He just watched her through the window. Sarah didn't call the police. She just closed the curtains. She wasn't angry anymore. She felt nothing for him at all, and that was the greatest victory of all. David eventually moved to another state to start over. He got a job in a warehouse, far away from the corporate world. He never dated again. Every time he looked at a woman, he remembered the look on Sarah's face that night at dinner. He realized that silence is the most dangerous weapon a woman has. He lived the rest of his life in a truly open world, but it was empty. He was a man who had everything and threw it away for fantasy. Sarah moved to a house by the ocean. She started a foundation for women who needed legal help leaving bad marriages. She became a legend in the city. People told the story of the woman who didn't say no to an open marriage, but instead opened the door and watched her husband walk through it until he fell off a cliff. She lived a long, quiet, and very happy life, and she never once looked back. The house Sarah sold was bought by an anonymous buyer. Months later, it was discovered that the buyer was actually a woman who had been David's first girlfriend from high school. She had been watching the drama from afar. She reached out to Sarah to ask for the truth. Sarah met her for coffee. They sat in the same cafe where David and Monica used to meet. Sarah told her everything. The money, the lies, and the silent plan. The woman asked Sarah if she ever felt guilty for destroying David so completely. Sarah looked out the window at the ocean. She said she didn't destroy him. She simply stepped out of the way and let him destroy himself. She explained that a marriage is a contract of protection, and once David broke that protection by asking for other women, he was no longer entitled to her loyalty. It was a business transaction at that point, and he was a bad businessman. Sarah revealed one last secret to the woman. She had found a letter David had written years ago, long before the open marriage talk. In the letter, he had detailed his plan to eventually leave Sarah when she got too old. He had been planning his exit for a decade. Sarah had found that letter 5 years ago. She had been waiting for him to make the first move so she could take him for everything he had. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator who had been poked. The woman was stunned. She realized that Sarah hadn't just reacted to the open marriage request. She had been orchestrating the entire downfall since she found that letter. The silence at dinner wasn't shock. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Sarah had played the long game better than anyone in history. She had let him think he was the one in control for 5 whole years while she moved every piece of the board. Sarah got up to leave the cafe. She looked younger than the woman remembered. She told the woman that she hoped David found peace, but she didn't really care if he did. She walked out to her car, a modest but expensive SUV. She drove away toward her home by the sea. She had no husband, no secrets, and no regrets. She was finally free, and she had earned every bit of her happiness through the power of her own restraint. In his small apartment in another state, David found a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photo from their wedding day. On the back, Sarah had written one sentence: "You asked for an open life. I hope you enjoy the space." David stared at the photo until the sun went down. He realized that Sarah's silence was the only thing that had ever truly held him together. Now that it was gone, he was just dust. The story of Sarah and David became a cautionary tale in their old town. Men stopped joking about open arrangements at the golf course. They looked at their wives and wondered what they were thinking behind their quiet smiles. Sarah had changed the power dynamic of the whole community without ever raising her voice. She proved that the most powerful thing a person can do when disrespected is to say nothing, watch everything, and take what they